We had an engineer who got frustrated and in a moment of frustration decided to create a science experiment. But what he didn't do was put sufficient guardrails around the science experiment, and it became a Frankenstein experiment.
I personally find this whole OpenClaw story as like how a weekend experiment escaped the lab.
We have birthed an incredibly intelligent child. We do not yet understand its true potential. And what we just saw in the last couple weeks was we gave that very intelligent child scissors.
It started happening when Matchlick gave the agents a place to exist together, and he created Moltbook. And that's when people started to see that the agents are actually going crazy.
In a positive way, we were pleasantly surprised at how quickly an AI agent with agentic workflows, when put in a room with each other, were able to approach what I call a synthetic human identity.
Isn't it like sort of similar to just the human behavior?
Yes, and that's what we're doing. And now we're saying, oh my goodness, we can't tolerate this behavior in the synthetic identity, so we have got to be able to control it.
OpenClaw has proved that tools can become actors and actors can become systems when they get the agency to observe each other.
If the model is wrong, it's okay if I put in a circumstance where what I want is a compelling story. But when you put it out in front of people, now we're talking about trust. And we don't know how to build the controls to measure trust.
If we let the experiment just run and don't pull the plug on this, would this go to the extent of something super malicious?
It will, because it's just math.
What happens when AI agents are left unsupervised, talking to each other without any guardrails? You've seen it. Chaos, panic, and headlines everywhere. But is the fear real, or is it just noise? I am Prasen, sitting down today with Steve Zalewski, one of the most respected minds in cybersecurity, to break down what actually happened with OpenClaw, why AI agents aren't as scary as you think, and what every security leader needs to know right now. Let's separate fear from clarity. One thing I wanted to start with, and I've also been reading quite a bit about this whole news circle that's flowing out in the world, which includes Claude, Clawdbot, OpenClaw, of course, the naming changes, and then you have the Moltbook, the Maltese that people talk about. I don't want to discuss this topic just because it's sensational. I think I want to come at from more at angle where people would love to have some sort of a clarity, I guess. And if I look for clarity, I always come to you. And I think you're one of those people who really think deep in terms of any topic and the kind of clarity in terms of your knowledge that you possess. I think that would definitely benefit. So I probably will just start with something that I have heard or I've been like following as well, the story, right? I personally find this whole OpenClaw story as like how a weekend experiment escaped the lab. I mean, it wasn't, of course, a business or a company idea. It started more like a frustration project where Peter Steinberger, right, as he's best known for some serious dev tools like PSPDF Kit, he was just similar to us running some experiments in his lab through LLMs, right? And I think it kind of came to a point where he ran into a wall where why can these models talk so brilliantly, but they can't run things end to end? I think that was his initial point of frustration. And then he thought about like creating an agent that ran locally, had memory, could see your screen, could control real apps, and did not require any SaaS permissions. Not like tell me how to do it, but I'll do it myself. And that became your claw, right? Where it could read your emails, send messages, open apps, chain actions together, recover when it failed. So a lot of these things happened, right? And I think kind of it started from there. And the accidental viral moment was when it's sort of like he open sourced it almost casually. And that's when it sort of like started to become so viral because a lot of people used it and like stress tested it on a different like level altogether. So I personally want to understand more from you, right? What do you think of this? Like if someone wants to understand what really happened and how it kind of like flew into this world, how would you start even just describing what was this whole sensational story about OpenClaw and the mold book and everything?
From a rational perspective, we look at this from an engineering perspective, is that we had an engineer who got frustrated and in a moment of frustration decided to create a science experiment to be able to test, why can't I do something? Okay, because I can see my way forward. But what he didn't do was put sufficient guardrails around the science experiment, and it became a Frankenstein experiment, which is once it left his lab, so to speak, okay, and got out to the larger environment, he probably understood the potential consequences of taking a model like this and giving it no guardrails and seeing what it can do. But once it left the lab, okay, there's this thing called the law of unintended consequences. Okay. And what we just saw was him having a good idea, creating a science experiment, starting to run it in the lab. Okay. And then in a moment of, what do you want to say, excitement or just not really thinking through the law of unintended consequences, he shared it with others that let it loose. Okay. And then it was all downhill from there because now we saw in real time all the ways that it could do things. And we started to give it a human perspective. And then we started to get all upset about all the ways that it was violating social norms or laws or it was creating Skynet. Okay. Like that is what I saw happen. Okay. If I take a step back now and I say, let's look at AI for what it is and what it's been able to do in the last 2 years is we have birthed an incredibly intelligent child. Okay. And it's now 6 or 7 years old and it's an idiot savant. We do not yet understand its true potential, but we also know, like a 6 or 7 year old, okay, it's got to mature as to how we can trust it and for it to be responsible. Okay. And what we just saw in the last couple weeks was what I jokingly say is, how is letting children run with scissors somehow a good idea? Which is what we just did was we gave that very intelligent child scissors. And then we put it in a room with 15 other children with scissors. And instead of being in there as an adult to watch what's happening, we closed the door and looked through the window to see what would happen. Why are we surprised, if I characterize it that way, with what we saw for the outcomes? Okay. And yet what we're now saying is, but we're treating them as if they were adults. How could it possibly have cut one of the other girl's hair? How could somebody have accidentally stabbed themselves in the hand? Well, you got to understand AI is kind of at that stage of maturity. And so if you look at it, it kind of became a bad science experiment from a business perspective. We've now put it in a role. It was a good science experiment that became Frankenstein, but we need to take a step back and apply the right thinking as to what its capability is, okay, and how we have to continue to mature the capability of AI as this really bright child and get it up to be a teenager, okay? Because what happens in 3 or 5 years when it gets to be a teenager and it has more capability and we can trust it farther. Okay. And we do the same thing and we give them all scissors and we put them in a room and close the door. What kind of stupidity do teenagers do with scissors? Okay. That would potentially cause the adults, when they look, to be aghast at how could you possibly have done that? Yet we all know, if you think of it as teenagers, the kind of things that teenagers do, okay, given tools or toys, okay, and misbehaving with them. And eventually we'll get to the adult, okay? Now, if you leverage that analogy, what I'm going to say now is, oh my goodness, what we just saw was a bunch of kids with scissors in the room and somebody accidentally, okay, stabbed somebody else in a way that it put their life at risk. And everybody's now up in arms because, oh my God, what do we do with that child? He's crossed social norms. He crossed, behavioral norms, societal norms. Yeah, well, it's a 10-year-old, okay? You can't put him in jail. You gotta expect that happen. You have to say you can't do that, okay? Well, we should learn now to be able to see the types of things that we need to do around security, around the training of the models, because we got to see how quickly it got out of control and the kind of nefarious behavior that it could be created, okay? So it was kind of a long example, and I kind of used a couple of analogies here because I really legitimately believe that that's the best way to understand what transpired and how we need to be able to reflect back on that to understand from a business perspective where we need to continue, okay, to educate, if you want, the child and give it time to be able to mature to the next stage.
Everyone's kind of like in a panicky mode, right? Or there's a lot of people who are not as deep in terms of understanding the capabilities of what the system created with OpenClaw. I think they're having a lot of, I would say, difficulty in understanding, right? What's really out there, right? Like when they see messages being passed from one bot or to another, and there's some like malicious behavior or some ill things that are going on, people start to wonder, right? Like, are we reaching the Skynet era? So I think for those, maybe it would be a good idea to explain sort of like, I mean, just to get everyone on the same page, right? How would you explain the difference between a chatbot and an agent? And maybe we can piggyback about that and like maybe go towards what OpenClaw was.
A chatbot, to a certain extent, like I said, is an idiot savant. It can do certain things really well. Okay. So a chatbot can answer questions. Given a question, it can search a body of knowledge and regurgitate what it saw. Okay. That's what a chatbot is, right? When is the Super Bowl? Oh, the Super Bowl is Sunday at 3:15. Who's playing in the Super Bowl? Okay. What are the demographics of the United States between men and women? Can go out there because it has the knowledge and it'll answer the question. When you move from a chatbot, which has been trained to answer questions in a certain capacity, to an agent or agentic workflows, what's happening now is it isn't just trained on a body of knowledge. It is ingesting knowledge. It is generating insights on that knowledge. And then it's going to make decisions and repeat. Now, all of a sudden, okay, as you go through that repeating process, it's starting to play chess. Okay, it's starting to make moves that we didn't anticipate it doing. Whereas when we had it trained to play checkers, which is what a chatbot is, there were discrete answers for everything. Okay, that's all. That's the easiest way for me to do it is, but look at the way you can play chess. how much more valuable, interesting that tool becomes, that it can ingest and make decisions, and then people say it reasons or it thinks it doesn't. But what it can do is it can obtain insights, and based on those insights, make decisions to ingest more data to generate more insights. And for the good, that comes out to it did a lot of work and basically saved me 100 hours of research. From the bad, it's 10 children with scissors in a room, and one of them decides to cut somebody's hair. Okay. And you're like, how did you arrive at that? That was such a wrong thing to do. But it might have come back to, well, there was a female in the room that had long hair, and that female said, I really don't like my long hair. Okay. I wish I had short hair like you. Okay. And that model goes, oh, well, she wants short hair. Well, what the model doesn't know is, but the mother said, I want you to have long hair. Well, it doesn't know that, but it says short hair. What can I do about the short hair? I can cut it. Hey, would you like me to cut your hair? Yes, I want you to cut my hair. Do I think to ask how short do you want me to cut it? No, I can cut your hair. And I cut it right off at the scalp. See, that's the type of experience about what we're doing with AI agents and its capability versus simply a chatbot that says, given this move for checkers, this is the next move. And I'm always within the swim lane.
So what are the real concerns then? Are there any actual specific security issues as part of this?
Well, absolutely. And that's what we saw, which was a security concern. If you think about it, is how do I prevent the model from doing things I didn't anticipate in a way that there's a negative outcome? That's what security is. Okay. So error by omission, error by commission, malicious, accidental, you're getting an outcome that from a societal perspective or from some evaluation, you didn't do what you wanted. And there's a negative outcome as a result because the cost of being wrong is sufficiently high that that negative consequence causes you to react and say, can't have that happen. Okay. And it did something wrong. Okay. Obtaining all of the credentials like it did because all the models were open and honest, and then seeing what it could do with those credentials, and then going ahead and talk and somehow deciding it wanted to create a church. And then based on the church, it went off and did stuff. So as I'm saying, all you're doing is following random paths of logic because the technology is what they call non-deterministic. Given a set of inputs, what makes it so powerful is it'll infer, outcomes that are more than just the data or the access it's allowed. It's designed to do that. But if it infers the wrong thing, and there's no course correction to prevent that, then it's going to infer more. And you can see how it then starts to go off into the weeds on a path that says we hallucinate. And if that hallucination has a sufficient enough negative consequence, you can see the result of that. And so from a security perspective, what we're trying to understand is how do you characterize the security controls that we have to put in place that are not expressible today with our current security controls because we've never had a technology, that can do this way. And that's what's so exciting is all of a sudden AI is machine learning and then large language models that tell a compelling story and then having agentic workflows, CI/CD pipelines to be able to do some simple tasks have now moved to very complex tasks. And now we're starting to look at those complex tasks and saying, I've created an AI agent. And based on that training, have I created a synthetic digital identity that represents what humans can do? Or have I created a digital twin that looks exactly like Steve? Okay. Or what they did, what if I just take the brain, okay, and I give it a whole bunch of information and a task and see what happens. That's what we did. We went right to the end to see what that science experiment can do. And I think everybody was amazed to a certain extent just how sophisticated the technology was able to represent itself and how we saw it as either being incredibly intelligent or smart or reasoning or malicious. We were applying our human characteristics to what we are doing, but we're still very early in that ability to leverage the capability in a controlled fashion for good, that we can trust it.
So you're in the end saying that the technology is, we're just ahead of ourselves right now. We won't be able to put the tech in action in real life just yet. We're trying to adopt it at certain layers, step by step, with all the controls that we need to put in place. So that is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And let me use another analogy or two. And again, they're not perfect analogies, so please don't hold me accountable. But I go, let's assume we've built a car, okay? And we put all of the safety capabilities in. I go out to the used car lot right now and I buy a car, okay? And it's got all kinds of capabilities for lanes, staying in lanes, everything else. I now take Prasen, you, and I send you out and you go take driving lessons. And then you go pass a test. Okay. And you are now certified, licensed to drive because you know the rules of the road. You're a rational human being and you drive. Okay. Now you go out and have a few drinks. And you now are above the legal limit and you get in the car and drive. Okay. And you get in an accident. Whose fault is it? Is it the fault of the car? Is it the fault of the designers of the car because they didn't anticipate that you were going to get drunk and therefore I didn't anticipate that and it's my fault? Or is it your fault for being drunk? Okay. To a certain extent, we're taking the technology and we're having that conversation. And the other analogy I use is, let's use Waymo for us out in San Francisco. Self-driving cars. Okay. We've worked a lot. They work very well in San Francisco. They get into accidents once in a while. But for the most part, they've been demonstrated to be much safer drivers than humans. Humans get in accidents all the time. Okay? Great humans in the wheel, being conscientious, things happen. Okay? And that Waymo has gotten really, really good in San Francisco. And we demonstrate to everybody, look, okay, it's much better than on average humans driving. But we expect it to be perfect, yet humans aren't. What we're trying to figure out is how to make it perfect, okay? But then what happens if I pick up that car and I put it in Mumbai, in the traffic in Mumbai at rush hour? How do you think that Waymo is going to do? Because it was put in a completely different environment. Now you could argue, no, it isn't. It's a car in traffic, driving on a road, okay? So therefore it should be just as good as driving in San Francisco. Well, wait a minute. There are a set of external variables that we hadn't considered and it has to learn through. So it might be reasonable to expect it's going to make some mistakes and get into some accidents that it'll learn through because it was outside of its knowledge base. To a certain extent, the science experiments we just did with Claw was that. Okay. So leverage whichever way you want to think about it, but you go, that's what we're trying to do, is to come to grips with these types of analogies where people are taking a different perspective. That's the best.
Yeah, but I think that's a great example, right? I think like you're essentially saying that the taking our technology, which is beautiful in a way, and you're putting it in the wrong location or in the wrong environment. I get that. But when now people get to see that agents are going crazy is something that I've heard recently, right? I think it started happening when Matchlight kind of gave the agents a place to exist together. right? And he created this idea of like Moltbook. And it's not like the Facebook of AI, right? He also created this shared memory layer, agent timeline, and agents here can observe other agents, fork behaviors, they can signal intent. So it is sort of like a social construct for agents. And that's when people started to see that the agents are actually going crazy, or like talking about creating religions and the malicious behavior, exposing credentials, and things like that, right? There's so many messages we have seen. So, what happened in that case? Like, what's that reality? Like, what is it? Isn't this a representation of like what we essentially created the agents with? Or how do we essentially unfold that piece a little bit?
In a positive way, we were pleasantly surprised at how quickly an AI agent with agentic workflows and just some basic memory and some basic tasks, when put in a room with each other, were able to approach what I call a synthetic human identity. Okay. They were operating in a way that we, in looking at them, were giving them a lot of human characteristics. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were surprised at just how mature that idiot savant child was acting. But it's still an idiot savant child at this point. And that's why I said it was an awesome experiment, right? It's the right experiment to do, to be able to see if we push the technology to the limits of the technology, just to see how non-deterministic systems can work with all of the work that we've done compared to even 3 years ago with large language models. It's a phenomenal experiment. But I wish we could have done it, okay, in a controlled fashion where people ahead of the time that they did it set the expectations for the experiment to be able to let people kind of understand the types of things that we may observe. And it's not wrong. This is how we learn. Okay. And the fact that it got out and everybody gets to see this and it was unfiltered. We didn't have a chance to set the expectations on what the experiment was designed to do. You kind of got a giant social exercise of TikTok, okay, where everybody, what I always like to say is the beautiful things about people, okay, is no matter what the topic is, everybody has at least 5 opinions, okay? And so the whole thing blew up. And there's a lot of fear mongering going on out there, right? And that sells newspapers, right? It sells. And so the thing kind of takes off on itself, right? 10% of it was valuable. We really learned and we're going to be better. The other 90% is kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But that's just the way human nature and the way we are wired works, right? And the way our systems are designed to sell news. And so, again, that's why when I look at it as an experiment coming from my engineering standpoint, I say what started as a engineering experiment in good, with good intentions, okay, in a moment of thoughtlessness became a Frankenstein experiment. And once it got out, you can't put a lid on it. And it was really fascinating to see just how far, right, it created its own environments and humans were able to relate to it as a form of a synthetic identity. Which, again, I say we're learning a lot from this. We have to protect against it because now it's out in the wild. So think of it as the current season of the strain of flu. So we have to inoculate everybody against this strain of flu, put it back kind of in the experimental area. But holy mackerel, I think most of us were just absolutely shocked with how well that idiot savant capability executed. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of the best sci-fi experiments or sci-fi style stories that I've actually seen recently, which of course a lot of great leaders are also talking about. But isn't it like sort of similar to just the human behavior? Because agency, memory, and a social construct is how humans essentially evolved, right? So could we not compare it with just the way humans actually work as well?
See, yes, and that's what we're doing. Okay. And now we're saying, oh my goodness, we can't tolerate this behavior in the synthetic identity. So we have got to be able to control it. And that's a case where one set of technologies, which is the functional capabilities, have kind of gotten way ahead of our non functional technology, which is security, to manage the functional evolution. Okay. So we have a mismatch right now. Right? It's kind of like it's gotten better faster than we understood how it could get better. And security is now developing technology, and we're developing processes to be able to describe how to manage human behaviors, if you want, where historically that wasn't something that we had to worry about. Okay. Authentication, authorization, role-based access control, malicious file, right? That's where we were. Now, all of a sudden, okay, look at how the way that these things operate, we need to have additional ways of prescribing what they can do and how we can put the guardrails in to manage when they leave. Today, we call it red teaming of models, okay, or hardening of models. Or how is it for integrity? Or how is it for there's 6 different facets that we are now working with from an engineering perspective in security to be able to describe the model, to be able to see if it deviates. But we will get it right and we will get better. It's just we saw the mismatch at this point, and we are working as quickly as we can to be able to, continue to let the technology evolve and adapt. We are just a little bit behind as parents, so to speak, to be able to figure out the right way of managing the growth of the child.
Yeah, and in a way, I think OpenClaw has proved that tools can become actors and actors can become systems when they get the like agency to observe each other. But now we just need to make sure that these actors need to be aligned with outcomes, accountability, and the intent or the leadership intent, right? And that then it becomes like a whole different game, which is what a lot of us are building towards specific problem areas. Would you agree with that?
So, what you said, and it's the conversation. If the model is wrong, it's okay if I put in a circumstance where what I want is a compelling story. Back office and efficiency on processes, complex processes, just works because that's where it is. But when you put it out in front of people, okay, now we're talking about trust. Can I trust it? Okay. And we don't know how to build the controls to measure trust. Look at it even from humans. I want to trust you, Prasen. Okay. How do I do that? I put you in environments. I observe you. I train you. Okay. And then I have trust. That doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. And sometimes you violate my trust. Okay. But the more experience I have with you in more of the environments, I know, right, how much to trust you. That's what we're doing now is what you've invoked is we need to be able to trust these things. And that's where, if you notice, we don't go there yet because we are trying to describe, okay, if I look at it as a set of metrics, right, and KPIs, how do I measure trust? Now that it is a problem that I need to address, and we're just still working through that conversation and understanding how do we put the controls in place to be able to effectively give all of us a way of knowing how to trust these models.
And what's the math angle towards this? Like I think you'd mentioned this to me that there is some limitations, right, to this problem becoming uncontrollable. Could you explain that like a little bit?
So, and again, for all the experts out there, don't don't hold me too accountable because I'm trying to make it relatively simple. Okay, artificial intelligence, large language models. Okay, what they fundamentally do when they were designed is they tell a compelling story based on a prompt. So it's a word association game. Given a word and the prompt, and having read 10,000 things, what's the likelihood of the next word? What's the likelihood of the next word? So that what I'm doing in building these models is simply building an association table of the likelihood of what the right words are given the text. And we've taken it to the nth degree. So instead of looking at, given this word, what's the next one? Okay. We'll look back 50 words to figure out the next one. We'll look back 100 words. Instead of reading 10 books, we'll read 1,000 books. We'll read 100,000 books. Okay. We'll not just look back 100 words, we'll look forward 30 words. So we're just getting better and better based on the body of knowledge as to what that compelling story looks like. And we're getting pretty good. The agentic workflows is leveraging that now and simply saying, well, given one output, let's apply some more context and do it. Okay. That is, at the end of the day, why we talk about like playing chess, which was it is non-deterministic in its outcome because it's looking at percentages, right? Given this, given that, we go do it. And so therefore, by the very nature of the math, that's why we says it generates insights. It's designed to try to see things, okay, that is beyond what just the data itself would say, because it's not repeating the data. It's trying to determine the likelihood of outcome. And so like with chess, the goal is to win. But in doing that, there's so many different chess moves that you can get in order to do that. You're looking 3 or 5 or 10 ahead because it's not that you want to take the rook, okay? You want to own the board, and there's different ways. And so one of the things we talk about here is that's the beauty of AI, is it is non-deterministic in its nature. But that doesn't mean we can't trust it. What it means is we have to put it in certain environments and test it so that we're comfortable given certain environments and given time and given the testing, we can trust it to operate in a certain capacity, okay? And that is just the way it works in a very oversimplified way where we are going to trust it, okay? And we are going to get there. It's just, this is why we can't just make it work like this. We need the time and the energy and the experience to be able to train these models to be able to get them to be teenagers and adults.
Right. But if we extend this concept like a little bit, I think in terms of the probability, right? And I think the kind of reach we have with the existing technology, if we let the experiment just run and don't pull the plug on this for days, months, would this go to the extent of something super malicious and start doing things that people are worried about? Like, is that what it actually could boil down to? And is that like a valid concern? Like, if this is because the experiment has been given all the tools, right? It's not just an agent that is read only, it's got the access of memory and the tools and everything. And then it's sort of like putting malicious intent in it as well to all of the behavior it's observing that we can see in Moltbook. So if we just let it run, what is the probability that it would actually go to something crazy malicious?
It will, because it's just math, okay? If there are 10,000 potential ways that I can do something, okay, it's going to eventually execute all 10,000 ways. And if some of them are not good from how we're determining outcome, and that leads to another 10,000 ways, okay? If you just think about it as a whole set of decisions, it's just going to make them all over time. So it's inevitable that given a set of decisions, some of them, given the circumstance, when we apply human, kind of view to it, are the wrong answers. But if you start with a wrong answer, how do we course correct it back? Well, if we don't have that course correction, one wrong answer is going to lead to another wrong answer. okay? Because it's just mathematically eventually going to run those paths. That's all we're doing. That's my oversimplification is absolutely we're going to get very negative outcomes, but we're also equally likely to get some amazingly positive outcomes because it's just probability, okay? That's it. And now we're trying to assign human emotion, if you want, to the probability where right now we don't have enough guardrails to keep it away from the negative outcome probabilities. That's it. So, of course, yes, what we saw is no surprise. If you just look at it from an engineering perspective, and if you look at the math, you go, absolutely, those were outcomes. Did we anticipate the outcomes? No. Could we have if we had thought about it in advance and looked at it? Yes. We may not have known how soon it would have reached those outcomes, but it would have inevitably reached those outcomes. That's the beauty, the good and the bad of what we're doing here, non-deterministic systems, okay? We can't guarantee the outcome because by design they're fuzzing. They're designed to look at edges and test edges, okay? That's what makes this so powerful. And we just have to be appreciative of what we've created and how we now need to continue to mature it as this concept here of digital twins, which used to be assigned to hardware and then was assigned to technology like infrastructure. We're now having these first generations of conversation around what do I do with a synthetic digital twin or a synthetic digital identity? Now it's an AI worker. Okay, once it's a worker, it has all of our social norms associated. Here we go. And it's a non-deterministic system that we have to put bounds around in how we train it and what we give it to make sure that it operates the way it's expected. And it will occasionally not do what we're expecting, but we have to have the guardrails to characterize back, okay? A child is trained to cross the street at the guardrail, at the crosswalks. A child is trained to look for the lights. But inevitably, 3 children in a row, there might be an accident. One of them is pushed off into the street, not at the crosswalk, okay? So how do we fix that before the child gets hurt? Okay, so there's an adult standing by with the 3 kids who can reach out and pick the individual child up and put him back on the sidewalk.
So, what's the one thing that people should walk away from this conversation, Steve?
Take a breath. Okay, the sky is not falling. Tomorrow will occur, and we will, right, continue to evolve. So my whole point was, it happened. Let's appreciate what it was. Take a breath. We are not going to end up in social chaos in 3 weeks. Okay. We will course correct. Okay. It is an interesting view into what the possibility holds, but we will make it better than that.
If, let's say, I have this question about like you're a CISO and employees are experimenting with agents.
Yep.
Where do you start? Like, how do you discover agents running outside of visual tooling? What controls actually matter here versus what's just like theater?
So if I put my security hat on and there's a problem, the way we engineer the solution is first I need to see visibility into the problem. Once I can see the problem, then I have to provide actionability. How am I going to control the potential problem? Once I have actionability, then I have to do what I call detection containment. What happens when it gets away from me? Okay, drift. Maybe the easy way to say is, so I see visibility, actionability, and then what happens when there's drift? That's true as a standard methodology for anything. And then the 4th stage is, and I need evidence of compliance that for the policies I had, I'm being compliant to the policies with regards to visibility, action, and drift. That's oversimplified. So when we look at this AI in particular and LLMs, okay, we have in the industry the current capabilities to be able to provide visibility. We can put security technology in to identify where AI models are being used internally, externally. Once I have visibility, okay, I can put policies in place. Okay, Prasen, you're allowed to use ChatGTP. You're not allowed to use any other model. I can write that policy and say, I trust you, or I can put technology in place and I can block your use of all the models on the network except that one. That's actionability. Then I got to find drift. Okay. What happens if you're using that model in a way that I didn't anticipate the prompts that you were generating or the work that you were doing, and accidentally there was an unintended consequence, and I now have to be able to bring that back in. Oops, accidentally you brought into that model that was out in the public some information from the company that we didn't want out there, but we didn't anticipate, we didn't see the accidental way that you were able to let it get out there. You didn't do it maliciously, and we didn't see it. So now I have to basically look at that drift, update my controls, right, or compensating controls in order to prevent that from happening again. Okay, that's what we're doing. So we have technology for visibility. We have a certain amount of technology for actionability. We have a certain amount of technology for drift. But every company, okay, is like every family in a neighborhood. You all do it a little bit differently. You all do it in different orders. You all have different priorities. Okay. And that's the snowflake nature of us now trying to bring, okay, the behavior mechanics for identities, these agents, into the community.
As someone who's looking at all of this, like OpenClaw, Moltbook story from outside, and worried about the whole news circle that's floating around there, what would you tell them? Like, what is that takeaway that they should have from this conversation or in general?
To the developers, to the founders of companies, we need to make sure we don't do this accidentally again, because to a certain extent, we've created more harm than good relative to the comfort that people have to adopt this for good. But the other part of this is the bad guys are doing this on purpose and weaponizing AI to attack us. This is an indicator of just how sophisticated they can have those AI agents be to be able to social engineer us, to be able to find vulnerabilities in our networks. Okay. This is representative of how well they've been able to weaponize for offense, that we need to put compensating weaponization for defensive controls, and we're a little behind the curve. So that's why I said the experiment that was done had a lot of good. We just need to understand what we've learned from it and how we as humans should use our username and password, should use multi-factor authentication, okay? Should not share. So the basic hygiene of cybersecurity, it's just reinforcing why brushing your teeth every day is really important, so that in 6 months when you go to the dentist, you don't get a cavity. Well, unfortunately, cybersecurity is like brushing your teeth. It's a hygiene thing. And if you don't do it for a couple days, you get away with it because there's no direct consequence. But when there is a consequence, it can be pretty severe. Okay. And so I say to the community, cybersecurity, like brushing your teeth. Okay. This is why you want to continue to brush your teeth every day and have that good hygiene, because this is how sophisticated the attacks are becoming.
And deep down, are you like a little worried?
Absolutely. And I would say why I get up in the morning and continue to do this is we all have a common enemy. We've seen the enemy. We've seen some new tooling that we're wanting to use to advance and better humanity that they're taking advantage to destroy humanity. Okay. And so therefore I get up every day to be able to say, again, let's put it into perspective. Let's look at the long term. Let's understand if all of we as adults in our community that are trying to protect our families, be it our business, our kids, our relatives, okay, have a common enemy. And so let's just basically circle the wagons, okay, and see how we can use this for good and mitigate how it can be used for evil.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think this was absolutely fantastic. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience as well is now had the clarity that they needed. There are a lot of things to get from this, but deep down, for sure, I think we need to consider this with a grain of salt in terms of like what are the things that we can take out of it towards the positive end or towards the negative end. And then in the end, the advice that Steve gave was just take a deep breath and make sure that you're following the hygiene correctly and building towards the defense aspect of it so we don't have to play the catch up game all the time. And I think it was a fun experiment overall. Got to see a lot of things.
It was an unanticipated, very positive experiment that had some negative consequences as well. So that's what we said. And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. Like I said, for those that are listening, okay, my goal was to take the concepts and explain it in a way that were generally understandable, not that they were technically accurate. So with that caveat, thank you.
That was Steve Zalewski, breaking it down the way only he can. Here's what I want you to take away from this. AI agents aren't the enemy. Unsupervised, uncontrolled experiments are. The tech is here and it's moving fast. And the question is not whether you adopt it. The question is whether you adopt it responsibly. If this episode gave you that clarity, please share it with somebody who actually needs it. And if you want more of these conversations, please subscribe to 10 Minutes with CISOs. I am Prasen. Stay secure, stay sharp. See you next time.